Okay, so good morning everyone and welcome to our Leadership Matters conversation, the future of work. My name is Robert Friend, I'm the Head of Learning Development at NHFT, and my role today is to introduce our keynote speaker, and with the support of my colleague Louise, we'll be monitoring the chat box and doing the IT bits in the background. So before I introduce our keynote speaker, I'm just going to run through some general housekeeping. As I say, please keep your cameras on because we do like to see your faces. We want to engage with you as well. So be the non-verbals that we're going to see on the screen. Microphones have been disabled, but what we will do is we will switch them back on if you've got a question, then we'll switch the mics back on. Otherwise, if you do have a question, please use the raise the hand function in MS Teams. Just a reminder as well to just be respectful and professional in the chat box. Be kind. If you do have any questions today, as I say, use that raise the hand function or post the questions in the chat box and we'll ask the questions on your behalf. Today's session is being recorded, so it can be shared with colleagues that haven't been able to join us today. And like you said, you can watch back on demand as well. Finally, for our colleagues that are hard of hearing, you can turn on the live transcripts within your own Teams by clicking on the three dots where it says more at the top of the ribbon on the screen. So we are really delighted to welcome Michael Reilly as our keynote speaker today. Michael is a qualified psychologist and a graduate of the Chartered Institute of Personal and Development. His expertise includes change, culture change, mediation, hybrid working, and well-being. So Michael is Director of Change Corp Limited. Michael's going to be discussing the future of work, how the pandemic has created the biggest change to work since Henry Ford introduced the assembly line. So really looking forward to this session. I think there's going to be lots of takeaways. We're all working in a very different way, so it's going to be well timed as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides and hand over to Michael.
Well, good morning, everyone. Michael Reilly has introduced, and working with me today, driving the presentation, is Lindsay Agnes, who's the head of Change Corp. And we'll go straight to the first slide and talk about the future of work.
Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay.
I was asked to come up with a title for this keynote for the Leadership Matters program. And it just occurred to me that the future of work has altered, but there's always been disruption. There's always been events that have led to changes in how people work. As way back to the invention of the seed drill by Jethro Tull during the Agricultural Revolution, 1701. That was a major disruption in how we actually produced food. We then had Microsoft, Windows, mobile email, the mobile phone, Facebook, social media. All of these disruptors affected how people worked one way or another. But Henry Ford was interesting, if we push on to the next slide, because there are a number of themes that I want to actually talk about during today. First of all, the concept of hybrid working, that it's here to stay. But also, and probably acutely important, is that one size does not fit all. And there's a need for sensitivity. And I really want to push that word sensitivity, because there are a number of factors that I'll be going through that actually need awareness from a leadership's point of view with regards to the people in the organization, particularly the hybrid organization. I also go to talk a little bit about agility. What hybrid working requires is to embrace agility. And then I'm going to actually focus on hybrid work and mental health. It's an area that I have some experience in, clearly. And there are certain things that I'd like to actually provoke some thinking on. So the next slide, please. Let's just look a little bit at Henry Ford. He was quite an interesting character. He said if I asked people what I wanted, they would have said a faster horse. But in actual fact, what he did was he created the Ford Motor Company in 1910. He produced the assembly line as opposed to previously had been this almost artisan workshop approach towards developing vehicles. A decade later, by 1920, Ford had 60% market share of the new automobile market worldwide, and the costs were driven down from 850 vehicles to 300. So that absolutely changed how industry worked and functioned. Next slide, please. And again, hybrid work is here to stay. Now, according to the UK Economist Impact Report, 98% of respondents wanted or already have rethought their office space or deployed hybrid working technologies. But also in that report, UK companies were seen to be prioritizing agility. So the Economist research revealed that companies recognize it as a vital path. 67.5% of respondents describing agility as more important than ever. And the majority of companies surveyed by the Economist saying that they'd already taken tangible investments in this direction. So here we have a question for you. I'd like you all to go to www.menti.com, use the code that you see on your screen, and actually engage with you, the audience, to actually start getting some input from you with regards to this particular question and a few more that we have during the course of the presentation. So if you all like to go on to Mentimeter and then ask the question, what do you feel are the key reasons for embracing hybrid working as a permanent business model? And you're given a number of choices to select. Very good. Okay. Has everyone successfully, hopefully, been able to get onto Mentimeter? We have some initial data which we're showing here.
So, Michael, we're just having a couple of people say they're struggling to get on to the website. So just see if we can post something in the chat.
Yeah.
And if there's people who are struggling, if you do want to just pop into the chat, like whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and then we can also just make reference to that.
Okay, the initial response looks to be improved staff well-being is the dominant one, followed by obviously the ability to use time more effectively. So let's go on then. If people are struggling, obviously you can do what Robert has suggested, and hopefully you'll be able to engage with these surveys and questions throughout the course of the presentation. So let's ask one more question then for you now. What do you feel are the benefits of working from home? Improved work-life balance. Easier to think of new ideas. Improved well-being. But a very, very big response there. I'm hoping everyone is getting involved and engaged during the course of this session.
Sorry, Michael, I was going to say there's lots coming in through the chat as well, where people obviously haven't been able to get on, and I think a lot of those coming through are number one.
Right. Yes.
Well.
Absolutely.
A couple of people have maybe put in more than one option, and I think I personally could have put more than one as well. So I think others are maybe thinking that.
Well, let's then look at what the Office of National Statistics have revealed in terms of hybrid working. So we know that there's a disruption. We know that people have actually engaged in hybrid working and remote working. And hybrid working is about harnessing the shake-up and giving people more autonomy to decide how, when, and crucially where they work best. And you can see that there's certain alignment with the survey results. But remote and hybrid working certainly can enhance workers' health and well-being. And the ONS data, half of those who worked from home in some capacity reported that improved well-being. It's only 47%. So we know that remote and hybrid working can improve well-being, decreasing time and money spent commuting, increasing flexibility in the working pattern hours. But the ONS data also showed from 2022, more than 3/4, 78% of those who work from home in some capacity said that being able to work from home gave them an improved work-life balance. So that is the national picture, and in actual fact, it actually aligns very much with the equivalent reports done by the Gartner Group and McKinsey from the United States and other countries. So if we go to the next slide, one size does not fit all. And this is what we're going to major on in terms of sensitivity, your leadership role. What is it that you need to look out for with regards to hybrid working? Because one size does not fit all. And there are a number of factors that I'd like to go through to actually raise the awareness that you need to have with regards to potentially disparities or deviations between different groups of people within the organization vis-a-vis those who work from home and those who don't. So the first one, if we move on, is generational. Now, I don't know about the audience here, but I have been for some years totally confused over the terms that have emerged to describe where people are in terms of their generation. So I decided that it would be useful once and for all to define, based on international definitions, who is what from a generational point of view, because there are going to be differences between certain generations. There are certain expectations that are different. There is certain behaviors that are different. So baby boomers, 45 to 65, committed, self-sufficient, competitive. This is all based on evidence and research projects. Generation X, 66, you were born in 66 to 1980, resourceful, logical problem solvers. Then there's the millennials, confident, curious, questioning authority, and Generation Z, born after 1997, onwards, ambitious, digital natives, and very confident. But from 2 points of view, communication and working together, there are differences in how each of those generational groups see the world. So it can be argued that baby boomers and Gen X focus on face-to-face relationships and are more engaged, and the younger generation create their communities more effectively online. And as a generalization, younger, I think older people are not adjusting to the digital world. So the question that I'd like to ask you, and this probably is going to be one of the most interesting responses, which generation do you identify with? Fascinating. So as more people put in their responses, I'm a baby boomer, but I identify with them all. Like, yes, indeed. There's a good one. You grew up with millennials. Yes. Well, there's a starkness about this graph, and some of the comments are absolutely delightful. But there is clearly going to be a worldview, depending on which generation you're from, and there will be differences that need sensitivity. So the work after lockdown study from the University of Southampton found that in the first lockdown, parents, carers and line managers reported being under the most pressure from working remotely. And the ONS data show that there are more men than women in the private sector, 58% versus 42%, but there are more women than men in the public sector, 65% women and 35% men. So there's quite a challenge there. So let's go on to the next slide. And this relates to sector and gender. Across all forms of flexible working arrangements, higher levels are reported in the public sector compared to the private sector. And I think that's quite an interesting statistic. In 2018, 42% of public sector workers reported some form of flexible working pattern compared to 21% in the private sector. So clearly, within the public sector, there has been a greater embrace of hybrid working, and that continues to be the trend based on the data. On sector and gender, and I referred to my previous comments that the vast majority of employees within the public sector identify as women. So let's move on to the next slide. Ethnicity. Now, before the pandemic, there was significant variation between the remote working rates of different ethnic groups. And this includes roles that were defined as key workers during the pandemic, or had a higher proportion of workers who identified as non-white. So let's move to the next slide and the difference of disability. Now, people with disabilities are overrepresented in occupations and industries with lower rates of home working. And while the pandemic offers the opportunity for working remotely, 37% of those surveyed by Unison, the trade union, a 4,500 sample, 37% of those disabled said that they did not think their organizations that they work for would actually accommodate or provide the technology and the resources for them to effectively work remotely. So that's quite a 60-odd% said we would like to work remotely. 37% said they were unlikely to actually be given that opportunity by their employers. So there's a sensitivity button there with regards to the opportunity that remote working provides for those with disability, and not all disabilities are visible. But the belief by a significant representative sample that they would not get that type of flexibility from their employers. Let's move to the next difference. Roles and qualifications. I think probably it is quite an astonishing piece of statistics that 46% of managers work from home in some capacity, including always from home, often or at least sometimes, compared to 19% of non-managers. So there you have a potential apartheid, a separate development occurring for those who work from home, equated with and correlated with seniority, and those not senior, members of the ethnic community, and potentially those with disability are being invited and are working within an office environment. So hybrid working requires agility. What organization does yours most reflect? I would suggest probably it's the traditional model, the top-down hierarchy, quite a thick bureaucracy, very much detached functions and departments. And that is as is. But what McKinsey suggests is that traditional organizations are least likely to be successful with the adoption of remote, flexible and hybrid working arrangements. Next slide, please. So this basically slide talks about McKinsey's 5 trademarks. So there's strategy, structure, process, people, and technology. It is the contention of the research that's been carried out by McKinsey and Gartner and others, and there's some sort of consensus here, that organizations need to actually invest in these 5 areas in order to actually embrace agility, in order to actually optimize the opportunity and the disruption that is provided by hybrid working. The first one clearly is what they call the North Star, clear purpose and direction. It is amazing the number of public sector organizations I've worked with where there is an absence of clarity of what the fundamental purpose or aim of the organization is, communicated from the top down or across the organization. I think also we talk about structure. That's the hard bit. The legacy of particularly in public sector organizations is quite a hierarchical structure, and it's a hard structure to believe that could ever be changed. So we're not going to try and boil the ocean, but there has to be some understanding that a flat structure with clear, accountable roles is going to be increasingly required if you wish to embrace agility, which is a hallmark of actually adopting and getting the benefits of the hybrid working environment, the new business model, the new reality. I think also from process point of view, there's fundamental changes that are required in order to actually deliver cohesive communities, working teams together, and a flatness that actually involves less vertical reporting and increased horizontal reporting and collaboration. And I think technology is key. The technology that enables people to actually be effective and productive and engaged and feeling part of the total organization or total enterprise. And one of the things that is referred to by organizations globally is the war on talent. If organizations do not provide a structure, a strategy, processes, and technology that reflect their expectations of how they wish to work with regards to improved quality of life, work-life balance, particularly those working remotely, people will start leaving the organizations, or there will be a drought in actually recruiting people into the organizations who have a very generational or specific view of how those organizations work or function. And there I refer back to the 5 differences that have to be sensitively attended to in order to ensure that all expectations of all the groups that I've described are taken into account. Next slide, please. So, home truth. To what extent would you agree with the following? My organization is progressing the hybrid working 5 trademarks. McKinsey talk about each trademark has its own intrinsic value, and their experience and research show that true agility comes when all 5 are in place. But we can see from strongly disagree to strongly agree, a midpoint or slightly low. Excellent. So hybrid work and mental health. So we all believe that, I think it's actually evident in what people on this call have actually communicated through the Mentimeter. So there is evidence that remote and hybrid working can have both positive and negative impact on workers' health and well-being. Remote and hybrid working can improve well-being for sure, through saving money, increasing flexibility in working patterns, and improving work-life balance. We've seen that. That's evident in both in the feedback, also from the audience this morning. But it is also my contention that the workload that comes with coordinating hybrid work arrangements complicates the work we already do, causing additional strain on our mental and emotional resources. And I would contend that those pressures are more likely to be on people who have caring responsibilities, people who have responsibility for either children or other aspects of home management. So while choice offer freedom and flexibility, the downside is it puts us at risk of decision fatigue, where there is a challenge to actually delineate my work from home to my life at home. And hybrid employees then have to consider how to be visible to their peers, teams, and managers in order to send the right signals of engagement and dedication. And that's actually quite an arduous and can be quite a stressful process. Next slide, please. It is also my contention that hybrid work arrangements can add pressure on workers to prove to their bosses that they're not taking advantage of working from home. And I think that attitude of taking advantage of working from home is actually possibly a generational one as well, as we have seen. So I keep going back. There are differences, there are differences, there are differences. And the awareness of that is critically important for any leadership in any organization. Now, we talk about this line, the staccato nature of frequently switching between working from home mode and working from office mode. It can be emotionally and mentally draining for most employees. And I think that's something that is reflected in the evidence base as well. Next slide, please. The critical word here is leaders must actually collaborate with their people. Rather than dictating work schedules, managers need to consult their team on what works best for them. We go back to a little bit of Henry Ford again. He was a very erudite individual, but he actually also said, coming together is the beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success. And so this notion of collaboration must actually be part of the DNA of how leaders behave with regards to those workers who are both out in remote environments, working flexibly, and those who are in office environments. But bear in mind, there is some disparity, as we've said, between those who work from home and those who don't. And therefore, the need for heightened sensitivity to that with regards to seniority versus non-seniority, and the gap between those two groups in terms of those who work from home and work in office environments or in the field is very, very important to actually be at the forefront of your minds. Next slide, please. So I talked a little bit there about mental health, wellness, and well-being. I'm a very big advocate of Stoicism. And what Stoicism is basically be in control of what you control and don't fret or be anxious about those things that you cannot control. And there's a lovely quote from Marcus Aurelius. Effectively, Roman times actually developed this field of Stoicism. So what we've done for you, and what I've done in the past, we've actually constructed a resource manual for keeping well. And there's a video associated with that, which I did during lockdown. And we're going to offer that to you as a support to looking at that area of well-being. And there's a second video, and Louise and the team will be sending these out to all of you who are on the call today. We've used professional actors to actually act out the good well-being conversation with people who are working remotely and the bad one. And those actors, there's an associated document with that to actually support you in conducting those well-being conversations with people who are working remotely, on the basis that we accept that there is a hidden current of potential mental health difficulties amongst people working from home feeling disengaged or distressed. And there are certain groups within the population of your workforce who are more disposed towards that stress or anxiety based on the evidence that we've discussed during this particular presentation. So all of that will come to you via PDF files for the document, loads of exercises, techniques and tips about how to actually take care of yourself when you're working remotely. And hopefully you'll actually find a benefit. And of course, we'll be sending out, Louise and the team and Robert will be sending out the videos on Vimeo, which you can then access at any time at your leisure. And they're all ready to go after the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. So before we have a couple of more questions to ask, I'd just like to maybe summarize what I've been saying. Hybrid work requires organizational agility, and investment is required in those 5 trademarks. So it's clear from the survey piece that we just did on Mentimeter that at the best it's middle, as opposed to strongly agree, and maybe actually disagree that actually any investment is being made in those 5 trademarks as we have defined them and have been defined by McKinsey. Business leaders, everyone on this call, must pay attention to empowering their work with the right digital tools, the right technology, the right tools to actually ensure collaboration, speed of decision making, engagement, and innovation and information sharing. Because an awful lot of that innovation or creative innovation does come from spontaneous contact and engagement. Therefore, some organizations have times that they set in their diary for what they call maybe a scrum, where they're just 15 minutes on a Monday morning saying, how's everyone? It's like an engagement technique. It comes from actually the agile methodology, where each week any issues, pitfalls, challenges, tasks are discussed by groups, small groups, and it's only 15 minutes, but it's also about innovation and spontaneous communication and just making sure that everyone is okay. So agility and embracing agility provides a better working environment for employees. It does enhance creativity, but there are differences amongst employees that require absolute sensitivity and attention that we've described. So let's go to the next question. What's the one key takeaway from today's session?
Michael, what I was going to say as well is that if people are struggling to post that, onto Menti, if they want to post it into the chat, that may be something to do as well. Brilliant.
It's good. Yes, I mean, we've got some really, really interesting Collaboration is key. I think also a large number of people would, consideration of how our hybrid working arrangements, our flexible working arrangements on different demographic groups is important and critical. And the one takeaway, yeah, sensitive to employee situations, yes, indeed. Stoicism is important for health and well-being. Yes, it is. And when you read the resource manual, which I authored, you'll get a lot more about that. It also looks at breathing techniques, mindfulness exercises, and also how you manage your information diet as well as your physical diet. And we are increasingly exposed to vast amounts of negative narrative, negative stories, which gives a sense of depression. But there are certain things that you cannot do anything about, so kick it into the long grass. Now, having the regular checks is again a structural and fundamental thing that can be done by any team. It's not an agenda-driven session. It's basically, anyone need any help, anything that's a challenge, anyone like to report something really positive to the group, to the team, and that keeps the connection with the group within the organization, with whatever function they are in. And the question there of opportunity based on educational attainment, I think that's one of, we talk about role and qualifications. You cannot allow a situation for separate development, for separate pathways to exist for those that have had to, for various reasons, be in the field or be in an office environment, often, as I said, defined as key workers, but highly representative of people from ethnic backgrounds. And also the challenges and stresses that take place for people who have caring responsibilities is going to be, according to the research, is a disproportionate number of women who experience some of those challenges. And therefore, there is some real alarm bells that you need to be aware of, because the end game is that there's no given right to exist as an organization if you can't hold on to your people, if you can't develop your people, and if you can't recruit people, because there are expectations that we refer to that are different amongst different generations. That generational issue is critically important. And so I hope, as I sort of end my piece here, that sensitivity is actually something that you take away from today's session. And next, please. So just one thing. What's one thing that you'd do differently following today's session? Just one thing. And of course, we can use the chat box as well. If there are any parallels between the private and public sector in the work that's been done by Accenture, they actually use the expression the war for talent. They've actually seen situations where people have left and are leaving organizations and are not joining organizations consciously making a decision that the quality of life and work balance is more important to them than anything. And that actually now has become a normative and permanent part of the business model. And if we look here at some of the expressions in terms of, you know, what do you do differently? The key theme is communication here, and reach out, and engagement, and sensitivity beyond the differences that we've described. I can't think because I'm doing most of what has been discussed, and so I would expect so for many people in leadership roles. So that's the end of the session. I hope you've enjoyed it. It has been certainly a pleasure preparing it, engaging in both my experience and also with the evidence and the research that is showing a definite consensus with regards to the challenges and of hybrid and remote working, and the future of work has changed and will never be the same. And that is actually, but it's never going to be one size fits all. And there are groups within the working population that are not necessarily going to be served well unless there's structure, strategy, process, people policies and orientations that actually reflect in the 5 trademarks that actually attend to the needs of those significant groups within your work population. Thank you. Over to you, Robert.
Brilliant, thank you, Michael. And there's loads of appreciation starting to come through in the chat box. I'm just trying to keep tabs because I think someone has just posted a question. So I'll be interested in hearing from you about how we can support those who do not want to return to the workplace, and how we can manage the hybridation and increase the presence in the workplace. The healthcare business, which I am in, does not require presence in the workplace.
So I think the main element is to use, I think, in terms of engagement with people who don't want to actually come back into the physical workplace, is to ensure that, you know, their work role does not require engagement in a physical environment, then so be it. But there is another element there, is there not? And this notion of emotional attachment and engagement with the organization does sometimes require some sort of gathering that needs to be maybe a new paradigm, so that there are, as when it's safe to do so, as it is, I believe now, there needs to be a reach out where people are allowed to actually congregate together, the touch and feel engagement, and to actually simulate, in some respects, on a periodic basis, the water fountain or the conversation in the canteen that actually sparks the sharing of information and ideas. The other technology element is the scrum, the 15-minute scrum, every Monday, every Friday. Friday might be, how's it go this week? Any issues, challenges for next week? Any positives? So you can use the technology to actually have engagement that is degraded as a consequence of people being in their home environment. And you can actually use physical gathering of people within a fixed environment to actually have them as innovation and creative sessions, or how are we all doing? So it's a different type of leadership styles required, perhaps, a different type of thought process with regards to what's going on in terms of the dynamics of the organization and the people within it. And if everyone's sensitivity bar is high, then you actually increasingly get more skilled at actually being aware that not one size fits all, and that you can't, if somebody is working from home, is engaged, is having challenges and difficulties, And those challenges and difficulties are the reason they articulate for not wanting to come into an office. The challenges and difficulties might actually be exasperated and exaggerated by actually working at home, because they may fall into one of those groups within your work population that actually leads to this, what they call a samsara, a vicious cycle. So you do have to understand what's the rationale and the motivation. Does it affect work? Does it not? And so on.
Thank you, Michael. I was going to say, if anyone has got any questions, if they want to use the raise the hand function, but there are lots of, appreciation coming through the chat. People saying that they're looking forward to receiving the resources and the videos. So I think that will be really positive, that they can take something away and share that as well with their teams.
Yes, and I would just the Keeping Resource Manual and the associated video that talks about stoicism and taking care of yourself and being in control, and at the front end does refer to the COVID context, because that's when that was produced. But this 95% of it is applicable to the current work business model and how people are working. So front end COVID is related because of the time of production, but it's very, very applicable in terms of the current working models.
Brilliant, thank you. And just a reminder, we will be sending those out after the call as well. So no one has posted any questions or raised their hand. So at this point, I'd like to thank Michael for your time this morning as well, and taking us through that hybrid working and the models, and thinking about what we do and how we can do things differently as well. So a massive thank you to you. I have got a couple of slides to just run through, which I will just do now. So my colleague will be sending out or posting into the chat as well the survey to just fill in some evaluation from today's session. So that's just been posted in the chat. So our next session is the 20th of June, and it's inclusive language, putting people first, how language we use makes a difference. So language is constantly changing and has more power than we often give it credit for. The landscape in which we live and work has changed rapidly in recent years and will continue to do so, with the upcoming generations demanding even more of us, all when it comes to inclusive practice. The session is going to be run by members of our LGBTQ+ community within the ICN. They're going to be exploring the importance of inclusive language, sometimes known as neutral language, within the workplace, why it matters, the effect it can have, and the role that we can all play. So information of that will be sent out via all your organisations, and a follow-up email from today as well. So a massive thank you to all of you for joining. Thank you to Michael and to Lindsay in the background sharing the slides for Michael as well. Thank you for all attending, and see you all soon.
Bye now.
She'll just spend it all. She won't buy another house, she'll spend it all.